Greetings! Today we're going to be looking at a process that you can use to try to debug your PsychoPy scripts. So over the years, people have written to me talking about trying to program their own PsychoPy scripts after using my videos. And sometimes they'll get stuck on something, and every problem, of course, is different. So I'm not necessarily claiming that you're all going to have the exact same problem I have here today. In fact, I have a somewhat artificial problem, but I want to kind of show you some general steps that you can apply to maybe quickly diagnose what the issue is and try to solve your problem. So I've got a very basic memory experiment here. If you've followed my other tutorial videos, this will be very familiar to you, but I've got a study phase. 15 words are shown in here. I actually have a second study phase that follows immediately afterwards, where another 5 words are shown here. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this extra blank period here. And then I have an instruction screen between the study phase and the final test phase. And in the test phase, we show participants words, some of which they've seen before and some are new. And on each test trial, they have to rate their confidence that the item was seen before on a scale of 1 to 6, and then rate whether they are making that rating because they can recollect the word from the study list or whether it's familiar. If you had trouble following that, all you need to know is people see a bunch of words, and later we quiz them about those words. And what we want to do in this quiz is basically only ask the second question if participants answer the first question in a particular way. So if you followed my other mini tutorial on branching in PsychoPy, this is basically an implementation of branching. So if you've been following all my tutorial videos, you should know how to actually implement this experiment without any issues. So what I want to show you today, though, is what happens if you were trying to implement this and you encountered a bug. What could you do to fix that bug? So before we really get started, let me run the experiment and show you guys what it actually looks like from a subject's perspective, and then I will show you the issue that we are trying to fix. So subjects begin our experiment and words appear one at a time on the screen. You can see that words stay around on the screen for about 4 seconds or so, and in this case, half of the words are in white and half are in blue. And we could have given subjects instructions to treat the white words and the blue words somewhat differently. Now there are 20 words that are being shown here, and so it does take a little while to go through this study phase. And this is actually something I wanted to show you because we're going to work with how do we debug an experiment that takes this long to run. But as the study phase ends, subjects are told to get the researcher. You would obviously talk to the subject at this point, give them some instructions for how the test is going to operate. And then the test works like this. They're shown a word, and subjects have to indicate whether they believe the word was old. So this is a word that they saw in the study phase, or it's new. So let's say I press number 6. So now I say that I think the word was studied. And then I get asked this follow-up question. Are you saying that you can re-experience or recollect comb from the study phase, or are you saying that you just know or that the word is familiar? So I'm going to say I can re-experience. Now we have the word park, and let's say that I think that park is a new item, so I'm going to press 1 here. However, in this case, I don't want to be asked the follow-up question. I don't want subjects to be asked whether they can re-experience park from the study phase or whether they just know park was in the study phase, because the subject pressed 1. The subject told us that this was a new word. So I don't want that question to come up. So if subjects press 4, 5, or 6 here, then I want to get the follow-up question. So I pressed 4 there. But if subjects press 1, 2, or 3, I don't want to ask them the follow-up question. Now again, if you followed my branching tutorial in PsychoPy, you probably can implement this fairly easily. So for you, it won't be a problem. But what happens if you were trying to implement this and something was going wrong? So obviously my code doesn't work right now. No matter what key a subject presses when they indicate confidence, what's happening is that they are always being asked this follow-up question. So in the trial confidence slide, we have a little bit of code in here, and that's what I had just pulled up. So what this code does is it checks to see if the confidence keys are 4, 5, or 6, and if they are, then it sets this variable doRK_loop to 1, and here's our RK loop. If the confidence keys are not 4, 5, or 6, then it sets this variable doRK_loop to 0. So doRK_loop is a dummy variable that basically, if this is set to 1, then this whole loop should run once, and what is in this loop is the RK decision. And if this value is 0, then this loop won't run at all. So doRK_loop is a dummy variable that allows us to turn off and on this other subloop within our test trial. And again, from the branching tutorial, that will effectively turn that question on or off. But we have an issue here because things aren't working correctly. Now, you might be looking at this saying, well, I know that the way this if statement is written is incorrect, and that's why it's not working. However, let's say you didn't understand why this issue was arising. And in fact, I'm not fully going to describe why this if statement is incorrect yet, and we're going to sort of try and deduce the problem ourselves. So the very first thing you want to do when you're debugging your code is isolate the area of the experiment that's failing and try to fast forward yourself to that area so that every time you run the experiment, you can get there very quickly. So what I mean there is we have this long study phase that takes a couple of minutes. But if I need to run my experiment 5 or 10 times as I'm debugging the experiment, you don't want to sit through this study phase every time. So the very first step when you start debugging your code is figure out a way to isolate the part of the experiment that has the problem and shortcut yourself to that section as fast as you can. So what I'm going to do here is actually go into the study trial loops, and rather than have them repeat or run once, I'm going to have them run 0 times. This will effectively turn them off. Now, another way to do this, I could have simply messed with the selected rows. So maybe I left this as on, but I said, you know what, only select one word. Now I would only see one word in this loop rather than 15. So both ways would work if you want, but I feel like turning the loop off completely is just faster, so why not do that? Also, if you change the number of selected rows, you have to remember later on how many items you had. You know, did I have 10, or was it 20, or was it 15, or 17? Whereas if you just turn a loop on or off, you can just remember to turn it on. One thing you do have to try and remember, though, is when you're finally done debugging your experiment, before you hand it over to your RAs, make sure you turn these back on. But anyway, those will be off for now. So if we run the experiment again, we are going to jump right to the test phase. And so this is going to make our debugging life a lot easier, and it's going to make our work faster. So let's see. Right into the test phase. So I don't really care what items are in the study list. In fact, I'm just trying to solve this problem of how come when I press 1, 2, or 3, I'm still getting quizzed with the remember no question, which I don't want to be quizzed by. Okay, so that's step 1. Isolate the experiment so that you get to the part that you need to debug as fast as possible. Now, here's the second issue. Try and figure out what the key variables are and track their values to try and isolate where the issue is occurring. So we have some possibilities here. So doRK_loop is the variable that currently is being passed into here to turn this loop off or on. We can do a really basic, we could do a really basic check here and just say what happens if this is 0. And if we were to run the experiment right now, this question would never be asked, and we would say, okay, so obviously when this is set to 0, the remember no question isn't asked, which is what we want. So then our scrutiny or attention should go to this doRK_loop variable. So there's a few things that you could do here. The first thing you might want to do is figure out what the value of doRK_loop is before and after the if statement, just to make sure that things make sense. So in order to output the value of a variable, you can use a function called print. And print will basically write something to this output area for your PsychoPy script. So let's say before if doRK is equal, and then we will add in the doRK_loop value. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a string. So we're going to see the phrase before the if doRK is equal to, and then I want to add in the value of doRK_loop But because doRKLoop is a number, we actually have to use another function to convert it to a string. So this is basically a bit of a debug output for us. We can actually copy this, and after the if statement, we can say after if doRK is equal to, and then we'll get the doRK value. So these two print statements are going to allow us to inspect the value of this variable before and after the loop, just so we can make sure that the value should stay as 1, because we're getting a bug where the remember no question is being asked after every single confidence rating. So this will let us verify that this is occurring. And by the way, if you try and run things right now, well, let's say we'll try and run things right now, we're going to get a different bug. And I want to show you guys as many bugs as possible today, so that when you encounter bugs like this, you have some idea of why you're getting the bugs and how you can try and fix it. So things look okay. I give a rating, and oh no, we get an error. My print statement has an error. It says doRKLoop is not defined. Well, that's strange. So if I go and look at my code, what I find is that doRKLoop is equal to 1 or doRKLoop is equal to 0. Think about this for a second. This is the very first time in the entire experiment that doRKLoop is given a value. Here it's given a value of 1, here it's given a value of 0, but up here I'm trying to access it before it even has a value. So when we get this error, doRKLoop is not defined, what that means is that this print statement is trying to print a variable that doesn't exist yet. And so actually, there's a few ways to solve this. We could, at the start or at the end of every trial, just give doRKLoop a value of 0. So it gets a value of 0, we print its value, goes through the if statement, then we print its value. Alternatively, we could, at the very beginning of the experiment, give doRKLoop a default value. It doesn't matter which way you choose. I'm just going to, at the end of the routine, before any print statement, I'm going to set a default value. Okay, now our print statements will work. So if you ever get the error that a variable isn't defined, you might be trying to access it before it's ever been evaluated, before it has ever been given a first default value. So make sure to initialize your variables or you will get that error. So now things work very nicely. Okay, now this is interesting. Notice that every single time we're still getting the RK question, but I'm alternating between 2s and 6s here. So the bug is still there. That's very interesting because in our script here, doRKLoop starts with a value of 0. So before if, doRK has a value of 0. Then we do our if statement, and it always leaves with a value of 1. So once you have started to isolate the issue, we know that there's something wrong with this if statement. This if statement is not working. It's supposed to only give doRKLoop a value of 1 if the key 4, 5, or 6 is pressed. So this is helping us sort of hone down where the error is. Something you can try here is you can try and say, what happens if we just manually force doRKLoop to have a value of 0? So as you're going through debugging processes, sometimes it's helpful to just test and check what happens if we force a variable to have a value that's different. Will our experiment run correctly? So this might seem like a series of steps to try and fix a very basic problem. We know the problem is in here, but again, if you get more complicated scripting errors, it may be a little less obvious exactly what's breaking down. So sometimes going in and manually changing or forcing, let's say, a value will allow you to double check that if doRKLoop exited the if statement and its value was equal to 0, then the RK question would not occur. So let's just do this one last sanity check before we proceed with the next step in what we would do to try and track this problem down. Okay, going through. 6, we didn't get the RK question. 1, we didn't get the RK question. Okay, so this is looking good. So if doRKLoop can be set to 0, Look, before it was 0 and after it was 0. If it can be set to 0, then this will turn off, which is what we want. So how do we fix our if statement? So here's where things become a little more abstract, because again, depending on where you've isolated the problem in your code to, you're going to have to try some different things. But my recommendation is simplify. Always simplify some code segment as much as you can and get down to the most basic check you can. And if you can get your code working in a really, really basic way, then build it back up to do the more complicated thing that you want. So let's just go ahead and comment out this whole if statement, because we know it doesn't work. And let's try something a little bit different. Let's say if keyconf.keys is equal to 4, then do rk loop is equal to 1, else do rk loop is equal to 0. So we know that this code here, this script, is not going to do everything we want it to do yet, but we're just sort of simplifying things down a little bit. We're trying to get to a really basic version of the script that might work. And if this didn't work, by the way, so if we ran this and pressing 4 didn't give us the RK question, then I might do things like trying to print out the value of key comps. So you might print out keys is equal to that, so that you can inspect, okay, what value is being passed to keys? And then you could start coming up with if statements to just check the specific values that are being pressed by your keyboard. We don't actually need this because I know this if statement's going to work. One thing, by the way, to make sure that you do before you try running this new version, this simplified if statement, is take off the manual forcing value. If you leave this on, do rk loop will perpetually be set to 0. So when you do force values, do them as a check, but make sure you get rid of them before you try and implement anything else. Okay, so keyconf keys, let's just do a very simple check and see if when it's equal to 4, we can turn the rk statement on or off. Okay, so getting to the test, 4. Aha, we have an RK question. Okay, but before the RK question came up every time, so what if we press 1 here? Hey, now it doesn't seem to come up. It's only a 4 that will bring it up. Perfect. Okay, so we have figured out that a simpler version of our if statement works. So that tells us that maybe there's something about what we were doing here that was problematic. So if we add in the 4 or the 5, and let's just test this out and see if this now reproduces the error. So now if I press 4, I get an RK statement. If I press 5, I get an RK statement. If I press 1, I still get the RK statement. Okay, so we have successfully figured out the problem. The problem is what we were doing with our if statement. We cannot check. And again, if you watched my other video on branching, we knew this already, but in case you didn't, or just to give you an idea of how you track down problems in your script, you cannot check to see if a variable is equal to multiple values at once this way. So instead, what we have to do here is come up with another way to represent this. So if you were very simple, very simple solution is to use some else if statements. Keys is equal to 5. To do rk loop is equal to 1. So we know that this works, so why not just try it again? This might be kind of the slow and poor man's way of doing it, but let's just see if this works. So 4 or 5, now do rk loop should be equal to 1. Go ahead and run our script, and I will spoil it for you. This is actually going to work. So we get to the test phase. 4 brings up the RK question. 5 brings up the RK question. 6 doesn't. 1 doesn't. All right, we are on our way to fixing our problem. So we could just continue doing what we're doing, and we could grab this other if statement, and we could then add a 6. Another way of fixing this particular problem is you could use OR statements. So you could say if keyconf is equal to 4, or keyconf is equal to 6, or sorry, 5, or if keyconf is equal to 6. So this would work as well. Or you could do it the other way that I had set up here. Both of these will work. So now we figured out that this was the problem of our script. So long story short, I know this was a rather basic example, and you're all going to have different issues with your script when your experiments don't work. Tracking down the problems can be hard, but as a general rule of thumb, what you want to do is try and isolate as fast as you can to the problem area of your script when you run your script. Then what you want to do is try and force values before or after different code segments and see where your variables are breaking down. And that will give you an idea of the precise bit of code you need to start monkeying with. Then, once you have that bit of code that you know is problematic, try and simplify it, make it as basic as you can. Put in a really basic form where even part of it works. And then once you have that little part that works, slowly build it back up to where you want it to be, and be continually running and checking your experiment as you go. And when your code breaks down and stops working, then you know that that line or those couple of lines that you added are the problem part, and you can try and diagnose those. You can look for, Google the problem. You can try and find YouTube tutorials to show you something about Python or JavaScript if you're programming in JavaScript for that particular part of what you're doing, and get that to work. So that's a really broad overview of sort of a problem-solving mindset you can use to try and solve your script problems. It's not going to solve all your problems, of course, but hopefully it gives you a framework to work with. Anyway, hopefully you guys found this video handy. This is the first video I've put up in a while, so I just wanted to have a few quick announcements. First of all, if you've noticed, I've migrated to a new channel. So if you were following me on my old channel, you probably want to subscribe to this new one. Second of all, in the theme of helping people debug their experiments, I'm actually now available for consulting help with your PsychoPy experiments. So if you are interested in hiring me as sort of a script doctor or someone to help debug something that's not working, you can find contact info for me in the description down below, as well as some information about my rates. And lastly, this is the first new PsychoPy video I've done in a little while. What I would like to hear from you guys, though, are things in PsychoPy that you would like me to cover, or common issues that you might have that maybe I could help with, as I want to start making a few new videos. And I know also that I'm using an older version of PsychoPy still. I'm going to be working in the next few months to create some new tutorial videos generally that use the latest version of PsychoPy. And as well, I want to hear from you guys what some topics that you might be interested in hearing covered would be. So sound off in the comments down below. Make sure you're subscribed to the new channel. And if you are in dire straits and need to hire someone to help you out, my contact info is in the description. That's it for now, guys. I will catch you in the next video.